From an undisclosed location in Las Vegas, Nevada, as a listener kindly reminded me of my mentions last week, and thank you because I've been saying it improperly the whole time. Jim McBride of the Boston Globe, Andrew Callahan here on Pat's Interference. So we have hit the road for joint practices, drinking on a Wednesday, Pat's and beers. For those on YouTube can obviously see, I've got an Alaskan Amber, and I think you, as you kindly put it to yourself, pulling a Malden here with a
little Bud Light action.
Little Bud Light action. All right. Jim, always a great drinking partner on the road, which we haven't done this for obviously 2-3 years. Though you were on the road in 2020, the only guy during the whole pandemic season. I think you.
My only friend right here.
Yeah. Suffice to say, this is better.
This is much better. I love having you guys on the road, and it's a lot of fun. Just makes things go by fast. We bounce ideas off each other.
Yeah.
We talk about things that we missed at practice that you saw, that I didn't, that I saw that you didn't, and it just makes everything good.
Yeah.
Like I've always said, this is a really competitive beat, but I think we're all professional and we're all friends, and that makes coming to work every day pretty good.
Yeah, and some of us run off and go national. Like Jeff Howe's not here anymore. We're going to pour one out for him, the Memorial Jeff Howe beer.
I'm not sure how many people actually really like Jeff Howe, to be honest with you. Except for myself.
Yeah, because of course Jeff would be here drinking with us if he was still on the
beat. This would be a 3-man pod.
Yeah, he's off to the 30th and 31st NFL markets that he hasn't seen so far this summer. But we're here in Vegas. Jeff was actually here in Vegas a couple of weeks ago. Joint practices. I think we could gloss over the major themes from the last 2 days and then get into what we really officially learned, because part of me wants to just zoom out and go, training camp's over. Like it's been a long 3+, 4+. Again, time is starting to lose meaning here. Weeks of Patriots football. There's a lot. Like I went super granular in my report. You have your report of what happened. But when you think just about how you would summarize to someone back home, hey, what was joint practices like? You would say what?
I would say that, that this particular joint practice, I thought got off to a slow start yesterday. And I thought there was a lot made about the Patriots' slow start, but I thought both teams kind of lacked energy yesterday. And I don't know if it was because they both flew cross country Sunday. The Raiders were in Miami, Patriots were obviously in New England, and the heat, and whether it was just no energy. I was expecting a lot more energy. I think we got that today.
Yeah.
Which was good. And I think that's what led to, poor performances by the offense yesterday until late. And I think it was, I don't know if it was Hunter, Henry, or Mac that addressed that today, that they even recognized, we started off slow. We picked things up. We certainly picked that up despite our, not great viewing vantage in Henderson, Nevada. But I think it was a combination of maybe jet lag and heat and maybe the excitement, and they didn't live up to that excitement. Like you build up like a big party or something and it falls flat. 2
days in Vegas paid for. It gets built up pretty easily for us or for them.
Exactly.
And when it doesn't go to plan, you're like, am I doing Vegas wrong?
Right. And I think that both those teams did Vegas wrong yesterday.
Yeah.
And they made up for it today. Devontae Adams notwithstanding, he was outstanding both days. That guy, watching him on film and watching him on TV over the years, you knew he was a great player, but watching him up close, and he was like, we got to see the Raiders up close more than the Patriots because they were on the further field for the most part. But he's special. He's special.
Yeah, for our view, for people who are not in Vegas, we are in a deep corner of these 3 sets of fields. And so the Raiders are on the nearest one, the Patriots are often in the middle one. And then they occasionally, I don't even know if they use the farthest field really, because you don't need it even for joint practice.
I think there was some interior line drills down there, and with 3 fields away and the massive humanity, these football players that are gigantic, you couldn't see anything. So it was tough.
So we're standing, we're collaborating. We had a very collaborative process as we were trying to determine what happened, but they ran team drills in the middle field. So you have the Patriots on the near sideline, Raiders on the far one. So you're trying to chart what happens. And sometimes you just see a football fly over seemingly out of someone's head and land in the opposite end.
Yeah.
But whenever that would happen and it landed towards Devontae Adams, he's tearing up the Patriots secondary.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that Patriots secondary performed poorly. It's just Devontae Adams is a 5-time Pro Bowler and 2-time All-Pro. Yeah. And to see him that up close, as you were saying, it was like an artist at work, because his releases, he makes all of the complicated things look so easy and seamless that there's just nothing you can do about it from a defensive standpoint.
Yeah, if you ever wanted to make fun of the NFL draft, look at Devontae Adams, 5th round. How did that guy last to the 5th round? I know Brady's kind of the poster child for that, but Devontae Adams, 5th round.
Was he 5th?
I think he was 5th round, and he's just.
We're going to look this up here.
Yeah,
but
let's look it up.
Yeah.
I think I was talking to Bob Sosi, the voice of the Patriots today, about this, and I think discovered that he was a fifth
And
round.
I hate to doubt Bob Sosi, who I brought up a few times in this podcast, but we look up Devontae Adams draft stock. I think the other part of what you were saying, slow start on Tuesday, picked up on Wednesday. Wednesday was pretty even. Like, I think it's fair to say the Raiders had the upper hand on Tuesday, offensively and defensively. And the only reason you would question that is because the Patriots finished really well. 2-minute drill. We all wrote about it on Tuesday.
Yep.
And there's this always, whether it's a regular season game or a practice, oh, can you carry that over and have some momentum day to day? When these guys know, like, I'm going to go to bed tonight. I'm going to have dinner. I'm going to wake up. Like, I'm not carrying that with me through all those meals and downtime.
I think us as writers, we carry it more.
Yeah.
That was our storyline. And, as quick as they want to forget about it, we have to too, because it's a new day.
Right. And so they didn't carry it over, whether that was real or fake, because their first drive, 9 snaps, you had 3 sacks, you had a throwaway, 2 screens that just sent Jacoby Myers like straight to the ground. He gets smoked. And you go, okay, this is back in serious trouble. But from then on out, Mac Jones, I had him 17 to 21, a lot of dink and dunk diet. And it worked, though, because the pass rush was the biggest problem there with Chandler Jones and Max Crosby, who were really freaking good to be expected. But that's why I would give the Patriots, if you're going to pick a team, the edge today, Wednesday, as we record, even though it was largely an even day.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think the Patriots picked it up. And I think we all had the same kind of feeling when they came out a little flat at the beginning today, but they turned it around quick. And maybe that's Mac's leadership saying something, or some of the older guys like Devin, like, we're not going to have another day like yesterday. But even when we talked to Devin yesterday, he wasn't as down about yesterday's practice as some of the younger guys were, or frustrated, because he's been in the league for 14 years or so, so he knows. He's been through bad practices. He's bounced back, and as always, he's kind of the lighthouse, the beacon of this team. And I think they look to him and they say, well, if Devin's not sweating this, maybe we shouldn't either.
Yeah, Devontae Adams, second round.
Fresno
State. I was doing the Derek Carr second round because he went 34th overall, 53rd overall. We got to talk to Bob then.
Yeah, maybe tough viewing in that day. Maybe he didn't have his glasses on. Because I was a little surprised too. I was like, and I've been saying it all day. So I've been telling people all day that Devontae Adams was a 5th round pick. So,
and he only just started drinking, as we've seen. So. But so, again, zooming out for the last 2 days, I think it's important to note that when we're reporting on a practice like Tuesday and Wednesday, and I called it one of the most troublesome practices offensively, because that's exactly what it was. This late in the season against a quality team to look as they did when Mac is 8 of 18 until that final 2-minute drill with an interception, that's unacceptable for a team that wants to play above 500 ball and compete for probably a wild card spot and more. They play much better in that 2-minute drill. They play better today. So I think my ultimate, if we're picking one offensive takeaway and one defensive takeaway, the offense is still what we thought it was coming into the week. But I think it avoids what our initial takeaway was up until that 2-minute drill on Tuesday, which is they're in real trouble. Like the trouble is still looming, but it's kind of backed away here a little bit. And I think you have 2 weeks to figure things out before you get to Miami. Yeah.
I think that, obviously they're running the Shanahan, scheme, and it's zone blocking, and that's going to take some getting used to, right? Especially, with guys that have been established in other areas. But there's too much talent on that offensive line. You look at the offensive line and say it's not great, but then you think about it and you're like, Trent Brown's a really good tackle. Isaiah Wynn, above average, maybe.
When healthy, at left tackle.
Cole Strange has been solid. David Andrews is a good player, and Mike Onwenu has been bounced around in several different spots. I mean, he ended up playing tackle Friday night against the Panthers, but we've seen flashes where he's a really good player. So there's talent on that starting 5 when they're all healthy. To think that they weren't going to figure this out is kind of a naive, because they're just there's that much talent, I think. So not as concerned as maybe I was earlier, because I think they'll figure it out. So yeah, I think that they're going to rely on running early, and I think they'll get that straightened out, and then we'll see what happens. This, like many Patriots teams in the past, they have a lot of questions at receiver. Like, this could be a really deep receiving group if everything goes well. Yeah, but if it doesn't, it could be a terrible receiving group.
Well, and the interesting part, you mentioned the offensive line, because I would agree with you. There's a lot of talent there, and I think this summer has underperformed. Now, you could explain that, underperformance by saying they're undergoing more scheme change and adjustment than anyone else on that offense, including Mac Jones, because they're dealing with changes in pass protection, running schemes, their terminology changes. Like, the receivers, they're largely okay. The drop back passing game, McDaniels we talked to today, is like, I recognize most of that. That's pretty familiar, but you've got a lot of changes for a guy like David Andrews. And I think if they fall apart or struggle, that is not just a ripple effect. It just kind of undercuts everything you want to do offensively, because you lose the line of scrimmage, you lose everything. And some of their solutions so far has been to run the RPO game, which Miami, we saw last year, ran more RPOs than anyone else in the NFL because they had the worst offensive line and an accurate quarterback in Tua. But it didn't solve all of their problems, So it'll be interesting to see how much of the new scheme they may return to before they want to, because you're trying to get the offensive line up to speed.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think, it's funny. I keep going back to the end of yesterday's practice and the end of today's practice where they really shined.
Mm-hmm.
And Mac was making this analogy like, look, you can stink for 50, 5 minutes in a game, but if it's tied or you're within a one score game and you run down and you run efficiently and you score one of those walk-off touchdowns, well, basically nobody gives a crap that you stunk for the first 55 minutes. And those were the great things about joint practices, because you can set up those situations.
I thought you were going to say the great things about Tom Brady, because yes, they were.
Yeah,
like a chance with him at the end.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that bodes well that they were able to perform. Now, it's troubling that they weren't able to perform at a high level throughout practice, but when push came to shove, they really did. I think that can be taken as an encouraging sign.
Yeah. Okay. So offensive line, there's some encouragement there. Offensively, I think they are what we've been reporting the last 3.5, 4 weeks, which should be not too surprising, because we're not making things up when we go to practice.
Right.
And if we were, they'd be a lot more entertaining than they had another bad day.
Right.
But the other part about, you can kind of stink for 55 minutes and then jump on those last 5 high leverage moments and win the game, is true only if your defense is carrying that water for 55 minutes. Yeah. And from their standpoint, they had a pretty good day on Tuesday. Though, again, the Devontae Adams thing is like, what can you do? You're not scheming against him. Like,
right.
He's going to win.
No one's catching. No one's winning an entire game against Devontae one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to have help. Like, no one's shutting him down. I would have loved to have seen prime Stephon Gilmore against prime Devontae Parker, but Devontae Adams. But we didn't get that. But he's the outlier, right? Yeah. And I thought about this yesterday. If he got hurt, they could be in trouble, because Derek Carr looks for him an awful lot. Like, he's like, and rightfully so. He's the best receiver in the league. But there's not a ton after him. I mean, there's Hunter Renfrow, but if you take that deep threat away, maybe you can shut Hunter. You can concentrate on him underneath. So, Devontae's special, but the Patriots defense played well, I thought, the last 2 days.
Yeah, and it would have been interesting, too, to see a little bit more of Darren Waller, who was hurt the last 2 days, because then you get the kind of Kyle Duggar and Adrian Phillips in one-on-ones, because they're going to be on the field a lot as this team plays a base nickel, and preferably with their 3 safeties, because you go, okay, who's our third best safety? Kyle Duggar, Adrian Phillips, pick one. And then who's our third best corner? And you're kind of in a conversation about Miles Bryant or Marcus Jones. Like, clearly you'd rather have Phillips or Duggar on the field, and if not, than the nickel. But overall, this defense, the bellwether for me in practice in terms of how well they were doing or how poorly, was the pass rush. Like, Matt Judon was excellent both of these days, and he kept them afloat. He had a sack, a run stuff, and a pass breakup all in one series today alone. Yep. And then yesterday has multiple run stuffs and a sack. So when he's playing, which is not a huge statement, your best players playing at their best, you're going to do okay. And I think that was the biggest takeaway I had. Even granted, the Raiders' offensive line isn't great, because there's a chance this defense can tread water. And that's a necessity for the season to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. But B, it feels like they're ahead of schedule considering his play and Jalen Mills.
Yeah, and I thought that was kind of an underplayed storyline throughout camp. Like, the concerns day in and day out were the new offense, the streamlined offense is struggling.
All of the synonyms.
Monday is
streamlined, hybrid. Like,
struggling on Tuesday, struggling on Wednesday. But no one brought up the fact that defense is pretty good. Like, and obviously sometimes in practices, things are set up to make one side or the other look better. The coaches say, we need the defense's confidence built. So we're going to tell them basically what the offense is running. But in the straight, ones versus ones, the defense played really well. So I was interested first with the Carolina practices and now with the Raiders to see how they performed against someone they didn't see every single day. And I thought that they held up and they played really well. So it was kind of that glass half full. Like, is the Patriots defense so good because the offense is struggling?
Right. Or
are they legitimately a good thing? And I think we answered that question in the last 2 weeks, that can be a legitimately good unit. Matthew Judon, obviously he tailed off at the end of last year. I think there was an injury that we didn't really have the full
coming off of COVID
about it. Yeah. And he had COVID. But if he can stay healthy all year, he's going to keep that defense competitive, and he can wreck a game. Yeah. And we saw him wreck a practice today. So
1.5 basically, including yesterday. But I think let's stay with the defense end, because we'll get to the offensive conversation, which has dominated the conversation all of camp, including on this podcast. Because on the rundown, one thing I wanted to ask you is, what's something that hasn't gotten enough attention in camp? And it sounds like you already answered that as far as the defense goes, or maybe a Jalen Mills conversation, or is there another piece of the defense that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think a guy that and he's done this in the past, but I think Josh Uche. Mm-hmm. Bill and Steve Belichick both hinted at this earlier this year that, when asked about him, is he an important part of the defense? And he's shown flashes, but for whatever reason, here, there, or whatever, he hasn't been able to consistently stay on the field or consistently produce. I mean, last year, he started that first 3 or 4 games with his hair on fire. He had like 2.5 sacks or 3.5 sacks. And, then he petered off. Whether that was a product of the defense, they were running different schemes and he didn't fit it, I don't know. But the fact that they said he's going to be an integral part of the defense, and he's flashed a lot this summer, I think, off the edge.
It's such a tease, because
exactly,
you rewind the tape to what we're writing and talking about last year, and it's the same conversation, and fairly so, because I'm writing a bold predictions column at the end of training camp going, he's going to have 10 sacks. And that's not, again, to seek any sort of attention. It's what I thought and we believed, looking at him in one-on-one pass rush, wrecking the Giants at the end of those joint practices when Mac Jones is winning the job. And you're going, well, Josh Uche might be winning a job, even with Hightower and Kyle Van Noy here. The interesting part, and the reason why you still might believe here in year 3, where we don't have year 3 breakouts, we have year 2 breakouts, is Josh Uche came in, of course, during the COVID season. So he didn't have a preseason. He didn't have an off season at first. And then he comes back around in 2021. Okay, he makes a smaller year 2 leap, but then he's kind of backlogged with the guys I just mentioned, Hightower, Van Noy, buried. And if you're not performing in your specialized third down role, or Bill gets upset that you didn't set an edge properly or allowed a scramble or whatever it might have been, he has no reason to give you a second chance, because he's got solid veteran depth.
He's got 3 veterans ahead of you that he knows aren't going to make those mistakes.
So
physically, they might not be up to the task like they were when they're younger, but they're not going to make the mental mistakes, and that's what's going to drive Bill or any coach crazy, right?
Yeah.
Mental stuff.
So in his rookie year, he had the opportunity, because they just had all those guys opt out or get hurt, and so he's playing. Second year, he's probably more refined and has the ability, but the opportunity is not there. And now I think you have a meeting of both of them where you're going, you have a chance here, or Anthony Jennings, who's in the same boat as a 2020 draft pick, to come in and go rise atop the depth chart, maybe even start opposite Matt Judon, or play a lot on third down. And that's why I think you could say we're suckers for more flashes in training camp, but it's really up to Josh Uche if he wants to see the job or not.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought up Jennings, because he was kind of my 1A when we're talking about this subject, because Uche, as we've talked about, but Jennings, he's played a lot this summer, and he's been able to set the edge against the run, which not a ton of linebackers can do. You're kind of looking at your defensive end, your bigger guy to kind of set that edge against the run. Jennings is there, and I asked Bill about him on Monday, and he made it really simple. He said, look, the big thing for Anthony is he's here every day. And one of the cliches that the Patriots like to use is stacking days together in the summer, right? Stacking days. He hasn't been able to stack days in 2 years. This year, he's stacking days, and he's making a difference. This is a guy that was probably a really early round draft pick had he not had that catastrophic knee injury at Alabama. So they drafted him in whatever round it was, the 3rd or 4th.
3rd round. We got this one, not a Devontae Adams 5th rounder.
3rd round, which I think a lot of people thought was a reach because of that injury.
Right.
But now it might be like, this guy's worthy of a 3rd round pick, because here's what he was before the injury, and here's what he can be now. So I like him, and that was the same draft class, right? Uche and
2020.
So you might be getting some real benefit out of that draft class 2 years later.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to see that across the NFL, which we don't really have the time, because the Patriots have a habit of keeping us busy year on the beat, year in and year out, or even on their off days. But it's, you talk about the perception that Jennings might have been a draft bust, and the thing that has my attention that hasn't gotten as much attention, I think, because he's just been plugged in from day one. He's starting at left guard, and you kind of forget about him as Cole Strange. And part of this is the nature of his position, right? Like, we can't write 20 different articles about offensive line play and not lose readership. But the importance of Cole Strange is not so much his play, it's just how his play affects Mac Jones, right? Because Mac Jones is a pocket-bound quarterback. I've talked about this at length. And what the Patriots might have stepping back from just Cole Strange, who's going to have rookie moments.
Sure.
They might have, depending on how their offensive line shakes out, a rookie at left guard, and then someone perhaps replacing Mike Onwenu at right guard. I'm not ready to go there yet, but like Mike Onwenu's been fine at right guard. I just also still might believe he's better at right tackle, at which point, if the Patriots arrive at that decision, say next week or week 2 or week 3 or week 4, depending on Isaiah Wynn's status, he's apparently on the trade block, you're dealing with a rookie and then someone who hasn't been practicing at right guard for very long. So like the interior protection for Mac Jones to me has not gotten as much attention, but I think you see it even in yesterday's practice on Tuesday, where he's kind of spooked at the live rush. And you saw it against Carolina, and for a reason that I think has a lot to do with that interior line. Yeah,
absolutely. And, he's made some quick decisions about getting out of the pocket and running. We saw, I don't know, like, I'm sure you noticed it today too. One of that's his scramble plays today. He was like Usain Bolt going down the sideline. I've never seen in 2 years, never seen Mac Jones run so fast. So, we don't know. We think it wasn't a design run because, Max even said himself, look, the plan's not for me to run. No. Yeah. And like, we know that. It doesn't, you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. But yeah, there's going to be times where he's going to have to buy more time in the pocket because, like you said, he's a pocket passer. He's not an RPO guy, even though we've seen them run some of those. But I don't think that's his most. I don't think you get the most production out of Mac Jones if you're running a ton of RPOs like you would for Tua or even Josh Allen. Yeah, they've got to protect him.
He certainly doesn't have the running threat component of that. Like your menu of RPO is a little bit more limited. It's better to get it out. We're going to hand it off or just throw the slant or the go or whatever it might be.
And I'm not saying Josh Allen is a speedster, but he's so big.
Yeah, we saw what he did twice against Patriots.
He's big enough to pull that role off, even though he might not be the classic dual threat sized quarterback. He's he's a transformer. Is what he is. So.
Okay, let's go from talking about what we had in Vegas to kind of things that haven't gotten as much attention in training camp to like the thing that has gotten the most attention in training camp, which is obviously the offense. Scale 1 to 10, your concern level right now as we have about 1.5 weeks before the Pats kick off in Miami.
Yeah, I'm going to go right down the middle and say 5.
Yeah,
like just because I think they have enough the ability to run the ball and kind of put a little perfume on a pig for a while until it's completely straightened out, or until this streamlined offense is running at a more efficient level. So you could probably make a case for higher or lower. So that's why in Vegas I'm going to split it right down the middle.
Well, I'm going to show
you
your
concern level.
My concern level is I'm having a second beer as we talk about the offense, and that should tell you everything you need to know. No, in all seriousness, I'm not as high about the running game as you are. Like I'm concerned about this. And I talked to Jaron Harmon after practice today. He's now with the Raiders, obviously very familiar with the Patriots, spending 2013 to 2019 with them.
Closer.
Yeah, and I asked him just like, what do you see this Patriots offense is? Because you're familiar with Josh's offense, McDaniels. This is a little bit of a hybrid now. And he said physical. They want to be physical and they want to run the ball. They only called 4 designed run plays today in practice.
Yeah.
And that's because they stunk at it on Tuesday. And this is the thing where I know it's going to get better, but we're at a point late in training camp where I go, we've seen enough to know this might not be the strength we anticipated, despite an outstanding backfield, despite a deep, physical, big offensive line. I think it's just all the change in the playbook has affected the run game more than most. It doesn't need to be their foundation, but I'll probably go 6.5 because it's now more on Mac's shoulders than we expected.
I was expecting higher from you.
Yeah. The second beer was a little dramatic, but Mac can handle that, I think, some point later in the season. But he's a guy also who we talked to last week is talking about the adjustments that they're enacting in this offense. A lot of conversation, and it's fluid between the coaches and the players. Mm-hmm. And I think that might all get settled and sorted out week 5, 6, and 7. But for week 1, Miami, and this is more specific to the matchup, has the most returning talent on defense of any team in the NFL. And that is a high blitz team that can play man coverage. And that's why those factors with the running game.
Yeah. And I think that, they've put a lot of stock in this first game, right? And a lot of eggs in this week 1 basket. The Heat, which, they loathe to talk about. But the fact that they're practicing out here, they've been in a training camp with 2 separate heat waves, so that helps. Yep. They're practicing out here. They want to win that game. They want to. I mean, obviously you want to win every game.
Breaking news.
So I sound like a moron, right? But they really they want to set a tone, and they don't want to have conditioning be the excuse why they lost that game.
Yes.
Like, so they want players going down to Miami and not being like, oh, like we were when we got off the plane here in Vegas, like that wall of fire.
Yeah,
you feel like
crawling back into the plane, going, just give me another half hour.
Give me another Alaskan Amber. So they want them to get off the plane and be like, we're used to this. Like, we're not going to be on the sideline, like saying, where's our fan? Where's our this, that? So I think there's a lot of eggs in that week one basket, and it's a big game. It's a division game. It's set up the way they want. They want to be down there when it's hot because they're hot, and they want the Dolphins coming up here in January when they're freeze their dorsal fins off.
And I'll say this because I think you kind of got close to the edge and then backed away from something I at least learned last night about the Patriots' preparations for Miami, which I'm not going to say here, but they're not only putting a lot
catch myself, didn't
I?
I?
Yeah, you did. They're not only putting a lot of eggs into the basket for week one, they're going to put more effort into preparing for the Heat this season opener than I think you've seen in recent years. And this is not anything sort of that's grand or a big secret or anything like that. It's a fairly normal practice.
It's just smart.
But it's different from what they've done in the past. And we'll know soon when we get to the regular season. So for now, I'm at a 6.5. But I think you're right. All signs point to we struggle against Miami. We need to start fast. You're on the road, and this is a team you're going to be fighting with for a wild card spot. It just to kind of hang in there. You got to get this one.
Let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
From today's practice, and it stuck in the back of my head when they only did run four running plays, like you said. We saw Damian leave practice early today.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a product of that, or was that going to happen anyway? And like we saw Damian after practice, he didn't look any worse for the wear, but did something happen to Damian? And they're like, he's the lead back. You know what? Let's go in a different direction, and we'll run these plays.
First of all,
am I just thinking too much about that?
No. I'm thinking too much about the fact that I leaned up off this couch, which is making noises, and it sounds like I broke wind in your room. But judging by your lack of reaction, the folks at home know nothing that happened.
I'm used to that.
Yeah, I sat next to you in the press box. No. So Damian Harris, I saw after practice mingling with all the other players, Raiders, former Patriots. He seemed fine. I think ultimately at this point in the calendar, you're going to take extra precaution with guys, whether it's resting them in the preseason or letting them walk off the field to take a break and go cool, like Ty Montgomery did yesterday. Ty Montgomery had 4 catches on 4 targets today, looked totally fine. Yesterday, did not. I think Damian Harris, it was probably a precaution. The other part about that, though, let's say Damian Harris misses the few games that we all expect him to miss.
Yeah.
I don't think the Patriots miss a beat with Ramondre Stevenson. Like, I think he showed signs last year that he might be a more naturally talented runner who's breaking tackles at a higher rate and has softer hands. And Damian Harris is a very good back. But as far as pass catching, he's still not a natural in that department. I think it unlocks more of that offense. So I'm not too concerned. I would say you can't afford to lose too many more players. Like Aguilar also took off some time. Isaiah Wynn at right tackle. And
they both came back, but I definitely know that Isaiah didn't go back into team drills. I can't remember exactly whether Nelson did or not. I don't think he did.
He hung around the sidelines and Wynn was.
And then he talked to us after practice, and he didn't seem any worse for the wear. So I'm not concerned with that. Maybe a little concerned with Wynn because he didn't go back in. Justin Herron kind of replaced him at right tackle, but so.
I'm sure it was a conversation they had before practice, right? Like, if you're starting to feel something, don't push it, step back. Because they're even taking, I had never seen this. You've been on the beat, though, longer than I have. I don't know, every 30 minutes in practice, they're stopping for 4 minutes and just kind of milling about and having a water and taking it easy.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I haven't seen that either, but I think that's probably a product of this weather. I mean, this is brutal heat. It really is. Like, it's funny. We talked to Lawrence Guy, who's a Las Vegas native, after practice on Monday. And, we're just kind of warming him up, no pun intended. And we're like, Lawrence, what's dry heat anyway? Because it was humid out here Monday. Like, it was like people say, it's 101, but it's dry. And he had a great explanation. He's like, well, I live in Florida now, and it's humid all the time. He's like, when you're in dry heat, if you're in the sun and then you go to the shade, you can feel relief right away. Like, it's almost immediately, your skin doesn't feel like it's burning. He goes, when it's humid, doesn't matter where you go. Like, it's humid, you go in the shade, you're still humid. So I think that was a product of just how hot it was here, and just, it was humid too. So I think they just wanted to juice up and rehydrate and make sure there weren't any cramps or anything like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't put too much stock in this. All right, I'll give you an option here. You want to look ahead to a couple things on Friday, not knowing how much the starters are going to play yet, or do you want to step back and recap anything that we might have missed about the last 4 or so weeks of training camp that's important?
Well, looking back, we didn't really touch on the secondary too much.
Yeah,
I thought I was kind of jaded because of the fact that we saw Devontae Adams for 2 practices, and he, no matter who they matched him up with,
it's not fair. Terrence Mitchell had one kind of pass breakup today,
and Jalen Mills really acquitted himself well in one-on-ones. He had a pass breakup, and he had a chip on his shoulder because he was beaten like 3 times yesterday.
Over 3,
and he was 3-0 today by my unofficial count. And he knocked one away from, and he felt really good about that after practice today. So this secondary, there's a lot of depth, and this is going to sound almost oxymoronic. It's not depth. Unbelievable depth, but the potential's there. Like you watch Jack Jones play, and he's one of these guys that can stick on a hip of a guy, and he's got the active hands, but he will have lapses. Like we saw Isaiah Zuber beat him in one-on-ones yesterday by a stop and go move, basically, and he kept running.
Their depth chart is like, we have a lot of snacks. They're just wheat thins,
right?
But we have a lot of wheat thins.
But there's potential to be Cheez-Its at that point, right? So yeah, I like that depth, and this franchise has a tremendous track record of developing cornerbacks, right? You can take your shots all you want at for the receiver stuff, but man, J.C. Jackson, Malcolm Butler, Jonathan Jones, all really good NFL cornerbacks that weren't drafted that they molded into really good players. Miles Bryant, might not be in their league yet, but he's getting there. Now they've got 2 drafted guys, Jack Jones, who, like I said, he's been hit or miss, but his hits have been really good. And Marcus Jones, I think he's a little raw, but he's going to make an impact on special teams. But I think eventually he could be a slot cornerback in this league. He's just too quick to not kind of get it, especially if they're coached up.
Yeah, him and Miles Bryant were the reason that Jonathan Jones has been able to bounce outside. Like, you can't surrender that space over the middle where a nickelback is really a new starter in today's NFL. Like, you need a good player there. And I think they feel like they had that in Miles Bryant and Marcus Jones. Marcus Jones has kind of ceded some of those snaps in team drills back to Miles Bryant, but overall they feel pretty comfortable with both of them. Yeah,
and Terrence Mitchell, like you said, he got burnt today, but he also had a really nice play against Adams. That's another unfair matchup, like everyone is against Adams. And I'm a little high on Sean Wade, who hasn't finished the last 2 practices, but I thought he has shown some stuff in camp this year that he's kind of a ball hawk. He'll take some chances. He's kind of a gambler, and he'll get burnt on those, but if you win some of them, we are in Vegas, so I had to throw a gamble.
You want to roll the dice with Sean Wade.
Exactly.
And you know what? It's funny. Saun Wade came up in the last podcast I did with Fitzy, and we did dueling roster projections. And he went on this thing about Terrence Mitchell is like your white, polo and khakis. Like, he's safe, you know what he is. You're probably good in most scenarios. But Sean Wade is just kind of like a shirt that's got some flair to it. If that payoff hits, you're walking down the street, some woman grabs you on the arm, or you're out dancing, and that payoff is worth it with Sean Wade. Right. Gambling with the shirt. And I left going, oh, that was kind of a funny bit. And I thought about it some more. I'm like, you'd rather tap into that upside probably if you're the Patriots, if you trust him on the outside. And I think that's pretty much where he's played, because they have so many slot defenders there. When you include Marcus Jones, Miles Bryant, Jonathan Jones, even Joshua Bledsoe we've seen over the slot. And if he can acquit himself well enough on the outside, you go, we'll develop him a little bit more. I might be on the hot pink Sean Wade t-shirt train or button down as we move forward.
Or, even collar up maybe.
Yeah, there we go.
Throwback. Yeah.
I'll have to ask him, because we keep involving him in fashion, and we don't know what the guy actually prefers.
Now, if you want to talk fashion, you got to go to Devin Gottschalk, because that guy knows fashion.
Yes, he does. All right, and I know mailbag questions. Mike from Twitter wants to know, which of the roster bubble guys have the best chance of making the team? Second question, what in the world is happening at right tackle? Let me get the second one while I buy you some time to think about roster bubble guys have the best chance of making the roster. Isaiah Wynn is your starting right tackle until he is removed from or until he's traded away. And their backup option right now is Justin Herron, who gave up a sack and had a holding penalty and allowed a pass to get tipped against Max Crosby, which Max Crosby is a Pro Bowler who might be an All-Pro someday. But that's their plan right now, is to continue to rep Isaiah Wynn, as much as we might bat around the idea of moving into Matt guard or Mike Onwenu goes to right tackle. That's what's happening. Isaiah Wynn has not had a good camp. I don't know if he's particularly happy about the switch or the coaching, but ultimately, I think they're going to go with their plan to stick with it.
Let's not forget about Yod the Bod too.
Yod the Bod.
Yodny Justice had his best training camp, right? Which is, it's not like making a big prophetic statement, because
it's a wheat thins kind of bar.
Yeah, because he's had 2 injury plagued years to start his career, but he has he's a big man, and Bill said he's kind of in that Anthony Jennings thing where he's out there every day, he's stacking days together, he's kind of trying to shed that, hey, I'm an injury prone guy and I can't stay on the field reputation.
Yeah. So. Roster bubble guys, who do you think has the best chance to make the roster we might not be talking about?
Brendan Schooler.
Yeah.
I love this kid. Like he's literally that kid who plays with it. I shouldn't say literally. People use that too much, but he plays with.
They literally use it too much.
They literally use it too much, and I'm not gonna. But he figuratively plays with his hair on fire. I mean, he's a great story. He went to 4 different high schools. His father was a high school football coach, so they moved around. 3 different colleges, 2 different positions. Now he's playing special teams. He told us yesterday that he had a private workout at Texas with Cam Acord and Joe Judge. They were like, we want to sign you. So when the draft, he didn't get drafted. They signed him. He's really stood out, especially on special teams. I don't know how you not keep this kid on the roster, because he sticks his face in everywhere.
Yeah. And sometimes too much, which is the inciting the second joint practice fights with Carolina. But that's here and gone. So for me, I think Schooler's in there. And it's funny because I think he almost started camp with the highest approval rating among beat writers, because we all just saw him. We're like, oh, he's going to be the guy. We've seen the story too many times. Undrafted kid, plays hard, makes the roster. And they've also got some open spots for those core special teamers. Of course, Brandon Bolden, now in Vegas. Brandon King, gone as a defensive specialist in Indianapolis per Adam Schefter. But there's another part of this where you go, okay,
where did you get that?
Yeah, I don't know. But you look and go, okay, Schooler fills one of those spots. The other spot where I'm going with this is also on special teams. DeMarcus Mitchell, who I did a whole podcast about the roster bubble and roster projections. Fitzy went great last week. But I didn't talk a whole lot about DeMarcus Mitchell, who had a sack in the last preseason game. And again, not a lot of stock in the preseason, but you're looking at their starting punt teams, both return and punt coverage today. He's on both those teams and starting alongside of Matthew Slater, Justin Bethel, and Brendan Schooler, who is the punt protector instead of Cody Davis, who also looked like he might be getting a breather.
Yep.
LeBron Ray was my 54th player on the roster. We mean first cut, second cut with Sean Wade. Probably changing that up a little bit, but DeMarcus Mitchell is quickly rising up for me to the point where he might be the guy where you go, we don't get what Bill's doing, but as Josh said, sometimes Bill has a foresight that none of the rest of us do, and that might be for DeMarcus Mitchell as a core special teamer who's also got some pass rush.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he has stood out. I think he's more athletic than people give him credit for, but I like the kid. You start seeing these guys every day. And you know more than the average fan. Not saying that we know more than the average fan, but we're just there.
Well, we're paid to, so we better know.
We see way more reps and snaps than most people do. So they might not know who DeMarcus Mitchell is. They might not know who Brendan Schooler is, but we do. So we think these guys, they might be strangers to most people, not to us.
Yeah. All right, we'll wrap it up with this. Andrew from the Pats Interference podcast wants to know, what's Jim McBride's best Vegas advice?
Best Vegas advice: go to the roulette table. Bet red or bet black. Stay away from the numbers. You're never going to get better odds than 50-50 in Vegas, right?
Yeah.
So you want to win some money? Go to the roulette table, pick a color, not a number.
Okay, well, you're going to a baseball game. I guess, am now going to the roulette table. And I don't think I can send you a video of what happens, but I will update you on how that goes.
All right.
And Zach Cox, who was supposed to join us, might have to put my money down because he had to bail. He was questionable officially on the injury report. Overworked, in parentheses, was the injury. But cheers to you. Thanks for coming on. We will do beers and more football again.
All right. Thanks.